This is Uncommonly Remarkable, where we discuss the surprising everyday lives and notable accomplishments of community leaders, entrepreneurs, and everyday folks like you and me. My name is Artis Beatty. I am a doctor of optometry and the chief medical officer for My Eye Doctor OD. Though we will inevitably touch on topics within my area of expertise, the opinions and the conversations held here are separate from my work with my eye doctor. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Uncommonly Remarkable. Today's guest describes himself as creative, solution-driven, entrepreneurial, and maybe an overthinker. He is the founder and owner of Frazier-Home Design, a company specializing in high-end residential design and is dedicated to creating unique homes that are tailored to the client's life. We expect to learn about sketching, architecture, entrepreneurship, and maybe a little bit about music, the guitar, determination, and much, much more. Everyone, please welcome my friend Tony Frazier to Uncommonly Remarkable.
Hey, buddy. Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
I am really excited to talk to you because I have to tell you, the skills that I've seen you demonstrate are just amazing to me. And so to really get to have a conversation about some of the things you do is just very, very exciting to me. And I've been looking forward to it for a long
humbled
time.
by that. Appreciate it.
Oh, man.
Excited to be here.
I was psyched when you said you'd come and have a conversation.
Nice.
I was so nervous. I was like, can I ask Tony? If I ask him, will he come? Is he going to say, this is crazy? No, I won't go.
It's super intimidating. You know, I get it.
Yes, definitely you are.
Thanks, man.
So, I got to start by maybe getting you to describe to folks a little bit about what you do. Because if I start talking about it, I'm going to go on forever and I'm never going to get it exactly right.
Yeah.
So
I don't know that I will as well, but let's see what happens here. So I own a small residential design company that's based in Raleigh, North Carolina. And 50% of our work, or more than 50% of our work at this point, is out of state. And I like to consider us a boutique design firm that, concentrates a lot more on the homeowner's lifestyle, the way that, they live, the way they move around a space, and, concentrating on how they want to relax in a space or how they entertain in a space. And essentially we design a home for clients that also encapsulate the way that, not only the way they live, but also their sight, i.e. the way the sun comes across and how do I block the harshest light of the day? How do I let in the best light of the day? How does it work with the topography and the views? And sometimes I want to block some views, right? So we try to just do a super intentional design that shapes the homeowner's life and hopefully improves it in some way when they live in the space.
I think that holistic approach is what's very interesting to me. I think when we first met and we started talking about design for this home, one of the things you talked about is, well, we really can't do this piece until we figure out where the house is going to be, right? And that you wanted to understand how it was going to be oriented on the lot. And I thought at the time, what does that matter, right? And ultimately, having seen the entire process and now being here, I completely understand why that's important. It's now strange that that's not always a consideration when people are building a home.
And that's the way I feel, people, there are companies out there, as you know, that just kind of sell plans off the shelf. And there's builders that just build plans off the shelf. And we've done that, and that's a great business, but really it doesn't, the house isn't the best that it could be. It doesn't live the best that it could because it's just, not even really cherry picked, but picked and kind of set on the lot, and it doesn't take in all those items that I mentioned. So I think that it's, when clients come to us and they're like, hey, can I just buy a plan and put it on the lot? I'm like, no, it doesn't really work like that. And I always say, like, really, we're going to talk about the way you live. We're going to look at your site. We're going to think about all those things that I mentioned earlier. And once I start looking at the topography and the sun, it almost starts to draw itself. Like, I want the garage here. I don't want to see over there. And you want, here are your parameters. Here's your budget. And then it kind of like draws itself. So when a client does come and say, hey, I really want you to design us a house, but we don't have land yet, we don't touch it. You have to have the land. I always say that the three things that I absolutely need. I need the client and their wish list, and again, the way they live. I need the land, and I need their budget. And we bring up those things in every single meeting, every single time. Like, you can't draw the house without the land, or certainly I wouldn't draw it without the client. And I also wouldn't draw it without the budget, which gets us into trouble fast when people get into dreamland and start going nuts and like, oh, I didn't think about it. I'll just bid it out at the end. No big deal.
Right.
And then you bid it out to 3 builders and it's 500 grand with every builder.
So one of the things that you just mentioned it, and it was one of the things that we talked about early on in our process, was a potential client comes to you and says, "Hey, do you have a plan for sale?"
Right.
You go, "No, we don't. We don't do that." So is it often that people come find you and say, "Hey, is that something you can provide for me?"
Yeah, I mean, once we made an online presence, that started to happen. Initially, we built our business with builders, right? So builders would come to us, and they would do just that. Hey, do you have anything? And they aren't emotionally attached. They don't. They're
Right.
just trying to make money, right? So they would sometimes bring us pre-sales. A lot of times want to buy something. And then once our name got out there, we would get a lot of calls that were similar. But as we built up and started to develop a following, then clients would reach out and be like, "Hey, I want you guys to do something very like special and unique for us. And I don't want that repeated. I don't want you to like sell that plan to somebody else. Like I want a very unique, special thing that fits our family and fits our lifestyle."
When you first began the company, so let's go backwards just a little bit. So when was Frazier Home Design started?
It was started in 2007.
Okay.
Right before the recession.
Great timing.
It was
Great
perfect.
timing.
It actually was in hindsight. It didn't feel like it at the time, but it was started in 2007. And I was working at an engineering firm. I started an architectural division within an engineering firm, and one day got the courage to start my own thing in April of 2007. And day one, I sat down and I went through the HBA, or the Home Builders Association list or the directory of all the builders, and I wrote down everybody's name and sent out mailers, this little flyer I made myself, and printed out at Kinko's or whatever, and then mailed it to 500 builders or something, and I got back, I don't know, 20 or 30 leads,
that's
which is
not bad.
It was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So like day one, it just kind of went nuts. And then, beginning of '08, I think, it started to fall off a little bit. And then suddenly, I remember I got a call from one of my builders, and he said, "Hey, man, the bank's not going to let me do any more specs." And this is a big reputable builder. He said, "The bank won't let me do any specs. And the pre-sales are few and far between. And the ones that we do get, they have to have really, really good credit."
Mm-hmm.
And it was around that time, I remember, it was like a faucet that turned, like, meaning it was flooding in, and then it just turned off. So that was the beginning of the company, which is great. And then, from there, we kind of trickled in. Well, I'll say first, it disappeared, right?
Okay.
And I say this all the time, but I was like hitting send receive on my email, refresh on my email over. There would be days I'd be like, "I'm going to get an email today. I know it. I'm definitely going to get an email today." Like, no, it didn't happen. And so there'd be like, 3 or 4 days without any contact. So it got a little scary. And about the time that I was about to like send out resumes, I got a call from a builder that was a production builder or a local production builder that was just starting out. So they just heard of me and word of mouth, and I went out and got it. And then, that started to pick up steam. And then a few months later, another production builder, and then another. So really the company was founded kind of in this production mindset. Production meaning that, they would have a neighborhood with 150 houses, and they would say, "I want you to develop 6 houses and have like 4 exteriors each." Mm-hmm. And then they would just repeat that. Exactly what we were saying earlier. They'd put that on whatever lot. It didn't matter, whatever it fit on. And so that's how it was kind of founded. And then later on is when it kind of started to go down the line of more, custom and thoughtful design.
And I think most people are familiar with that type of process, right? Because, when you maybe buy your first home, you're thinking, maybe I'm going to get a condo, maybe I'm going to get a townhouse. You may move into a neighborhood, and, then you learn about the word elevation and the difference between elevation and floor plan.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting the first time you actually realize that there may be 4 different looking houses that have nearly the exact same floor plan. And it's really hard to understand how the house on the outside can look so different while the interior portion of the house can be almost identical.
Right. And it's funny, even now, I do that because we get clients that are like, I kind of like this style and I like this style, or the husband and wife like different styles. And I'm like, let me show you something. So I'll just like sketch real fast. We're like, here's 3 different styles you can have on this same exterior. And yes, you're jogging things in and out, but the floor plan's the same. But in a perfect world, where I'm getting that vibe of the exterior very early on. So I'm like shaping the floor plan, not only around the site, as I mentioned, and all the other things, but also around the proportions and the scale of what we're trying to achieve on the outside. Like your house, for example, being symmetrical, like we had to know that in the beginning. We had to know what style you're going with and develop it around that, because I wouldn't choose to do certain things to go against that direction.
Then you had this 2007, 2008 period. We're waiting for the faucet to come back on,
Right.
kind of a drip at a time. You find this builder who's like, hey, we're going to do a whole bunch of houses. You kind of configure them to be able to put them in the neighborhood. How did you go from that? Because in a lot of people's worlds, like once you start to do that, there's going to be lots of other opportunity to continue to do that. So how did you go from doing that back to what you really intended to do?
So I think the core of the whole reason that I started is I'm an artist in the end, right? And there's not a ton of artistry to that business model. And so that's the whole reason I got into it to begin with. I was just somebody who could draw that kind of stumbled into architecture because I could draw all day, right? And then so at the core of that, I always wanted to get back to something artistic. And I remember it clear as day. It was a neighborhood called Oaks at Fallon Park, and I saw this builder, Dixon Kirby. And they, like, man, when I saw their houses, like the detail was on point. It was, the shapes were different than what I've seen, but they were like perfectly proportioned, and everything was done very intentionally. And I remember just being like blown away, like, man, that is like nothing that I've seen in Raleigh at all. And it just got me, like, my creative juices going. Like, man, that's what I want to do right there. Like, I want to evoke this emotion that I'm feeling right now, you know? So I started off, first I kind of like dug deep, like, where's he getting, how did he figure that out? So I did this, I hate to admit this on a podcast, I just went on his Facebook page and saw who he was following and then started to pick up these architects. And then it really went down this rabbit hole. It's like I found Bobby McAlpin, who was like, in my mind, sort of like the king of this architectural movement, who taught at Auburn University. Okay. And he had a lot of students that he would hire. And then it was this group of guys from essentially, you know, Auburn, but then really like Birmingham and Montgomery, Alabama, that were in this group under Bobby McAlpin. And then they kind of spread throughout the country. And I noticed that those guys were, in my mind, sort of like the king of the current architects, all of them, you know, and they spread throughout the country. So I started following all those guys. And then I started, you know, I'd read like every book or every interview, every podcast with them on it. And then I would find out where their inspiration came from, which essentially a lot of it rooted in English arts and crafts architecture. And so I like dove deep into that and essentially just, you know, just kept buying books and again, reading or listening to podcasts and just diving in deep. Then the big movement for me is like, all right, let me try this stuff. So I would pitch this to builders. At the time, it wasn't homeowners. Like I had builders, so I'd start pitching it to them, and they're like, no. And we're like, man, look what Dixon Kirby's doing. Like, they're killing it, man. Like, and look at it. Look how much better it is than what everybody else is doing. And I had one builder that I was able to convince. And then that, you know, I think that was 2006, I feel like. So that's no, I'm sorry. It was 2016. Okay. So 2016, essentially, I had that first house out there, and then it started to get attention. Then other builders are like, oh, well, he did it too. Then maybe I should do that. And then it just started to build momentum very, very quickly.
I see.
Yeah. And that's the local movement. That was, you know, then that's when everybody started coming to us for that feel and that vibe. And it wasn't until later that it became more of a national sort of presence.
That's really amazing. You know, you said that something I think is interesting, that you're an artist kind of first. So tell me a little bit about that. What were you drawing before? What did you have a passion for drawing something prior to homes?
Well, so I started drawing homes at 19. So really before that, it was, you know, cartoon characters and skateboard ramps and, you know, Bart Simpson, and album covers were a big thing, like in my teens, or just, you know, music stuff in general. I was really into, I don't know, I would go through like, you know, all the guitar magazines and like just sort of like draw a lot of the stuff that was in there. I always drew. So I was in class, I was I was drawing, it was always, and, in school, there's like always a group of kids that are like the best artists. I wasn't the top of that list ever, but I felt like I was always in it, so it was
Yeah.
like these little, not that we hung out, but you knew that there's like 4 or 5 guys that are the best, artists in school. Anyways, I felt like I was always somewhere hovering towards that group anyways. So it was a big thing for me. And that's how it kind of started. And my grandfather was a civil engineer and he taught at
Oh,
Wake Tech and he was retired. And so when he retired, he taught at Wake Tech and taught architectural history and statics and strengths of material. So, and my dad was a tile guy and my brother, who's 7 years older, was in construction. So it just kind
okay.
of like started to form and I'm like, yeah, I guess I don't know what else I'm going to do. So I guess I'll go to Wake Tech and go into architecture. And the idea at the time was to transfer to the School of Design and I started going to Wake Tech and loved it. Like I ate it up, man. I got in there, was like, dude, this is awesome. Like look, creating all these spaces is just so fun. And really I liked at the time we were learning CAD on the computer and I really liked that too. Like it was kind of fun. It was like a video game or something.
For sure.
And so, man, I dove in, and when everybody was at lunch, I was in the library reading books or jumping into CAD. And I wanted to be better. Like I was like, I'm going to come back to class and be better than everybody. And I just kept like doing that and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And I started interning, I think my second semester at a local architectural firm. And I did that for, I feel like 6 months or something. And then it was like time to go to the next semester. And I remember being like all caught up in the deadlines and the stress, the fun stress of the whole thing. And me being like scared to tell my boss that I was going to go back to school. And I never did. So, so I just like kept working. Then he's like, "Are you going back to school?" I'm like, "No, man, I'm here, buddy. I'm here." And it was around that age that I also found out, like, wait, you don't need to go to state or to get like the full architectural degree to draw houses.
Okay.
I'm like, I regret that, but at 19 years old, man, it's like that's pretty cool.
Particularly if you're doing
do it right
something
now.
you want to do, right?
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, I think that there's a lot to be said for that, right? When you find what it is that you want to do, but that you're also good at it, and so there's that intersection of I like it and I'm good at it, and if you can make that intersection actually work, then
Right.
you're in a really good spot. A lot of people can't do that.
And I touched on it earlier, but for some reason, I love the feel of the deadlines. Like I love the pressure. I don't know why, but I just ate it up. Like it felt good to me to live in that stress and that tension. Like I wanted more of that. I didn't feel good if I didn't, like on the weekends, I'd be like, man, I can't wait to go back in there and just grind. Like I just wanted that.
You must have abnormally low cortisol levels.
I got something going on for sure.
That's got to be what it is. It's got to be what it is. Tell me a little bit about the differences though between draftsmen, architects, and engineers, and kind of how they all work together. Because as I was thinking about this, there are lots of industry specific things that unless you kind of know detail, you just don't know what those differences are.
So I'll start with engineering. Engineering is broken up into several different facets. I mean, there's surveying, which is a piece of engineering, and then there's civil engineering. The engineers that we deal with most of the time are structural engineers, meaning that we design the entire home. And you may remember this in your process. We design the entire home and we get towards the end and then we pass it off to a structural engineer who designs all the framing. He says, okay, there will be a beam over this opening and this is how big that beam is. And so he does all the framing and the foundation and he sends it back to us. And then we cross-reference that with our details and make sure that we all align. And essentially they have a set that they seal from a structural perspective and they give that to us. And then we combine those two and then you go to the permit office. And in most areas of the country, you need that structural engineer's set. Okay. And then I'll go to architect. So a registered architect has a license to practice architecture, which you need for commercial spaces. And in some places in the country, you need for residential, but most not. So we've come across a few areas in the country, Chicago, areas in New York, and actually some areas like in South Carolina as well that require an architect's seal. But everywhere else in the country, you can draw without it. Okay. But back to an architect. So they have, they're licensed, and you need a license to do anything commercial at all. Churches and schools and things like that.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. And they, they go in, have they go 5 years, and a lot of them get a master's as well. And they have to work under an architect for a certain amount of time. and they have classes and updates that they need to take, and they have a seal where they can seal the plan. And then we have home designers that do nothing but concentrate on designing residential. So the good / the bad is you don't really need any school at all or any education to say, hey, I draw houses. You mean draw your house? So that's the not an issue, but I mean really same thing with architects. Like I see some guys with a license that probably shouldn't be drawing houses or have a long ways to go before they get to a certain level, right? So you have home designers, you have architects, you have engineers. And within the realm of home designers, you mentioned drafters earlier, is like within our company, we have designers and project managers and drafters. Okay. And in my mind, a drafter, or at least our drafters at Frazier-Home Design, all they do all day is really, they do cross sections and details and notation. And it's a great way to start somebody out at the company. So that's how we pull people right out of school that haven't really worked in the industry at all, other than maybe an internship for a brief period of time. And they come in and day one, they might dimension a plan and put notes on a plan and just start off and just dipping their toe in.
I see.
So you have a project manager that's kind of leading it all. And then the draftsman is sort of assisting them. And so we may have some small markups and they jump in and do that as well. And then they kind of build up in theory to project manager and designer, or sometimes they just kind of go a whole different direction that we didn't know.
I see. So when you're thinking about the architect versus engineering, do architects tend to rely on engineers for that piece, or do they do some of that work themselves?
I have heard in rare cases of the architects also doing their own structural, but generally from what I've seen, they always use a structural engineer as well. But in theory, they can seal, like they could do their full structural set and seal it as well.
What happens in the process if you draw something that is phenomenal and you send it to engineering, and do they ever come back and say, we're going to have to change this design for whatever reason because we can't figure out a good way to engineer and keep the aesthetic?
Luckily, we're past that point. And I didn't really mention it or get into it, but I worked at a structural engineering firm for 4 years. And then, so I have
So you've got a better
super
idea.
Familiar. But yeah, I mean, there are times where the engineer's like, hey, that's really cool. It can work, but here's what we're going to have to do to make that work.
I see.
But it's rare that we have like, hey, that just doesn't work at all. But they do, there's definitely coordination. We send them their plans, and when they design the framing, again, sometimes they come back with feedback, or sometimes they send something our way, and I'm like, hey, man, that beam doesn't really work with that roof. Like I've got to pull that beam back and cut it and go with a smaller joist to tie into the rafter or something. There's definite coordination where I think when I first started early in my career, it was kind of like a handoff and see you later, let me know when you seal it. And that was in the production days.
Yeah.
Like you didn't really like cross-reference it, but you get in the field and sometimes the builder would be like, man, the engineer's set says this and yours says that. Which one should I pick? It's not ideal.
Wow.
We've learned as we've gone here.
So I think that you describe to clients that you have a process. It's 4 or 5 steps, right? So why don't you walk us through a little bit of how that process works? Because I think that's very interesting, particularly if you've never gone through from start to finish.
Right. So, and that's sort of evolved over the years. It's and it changes really from year to year almost, not drastically, but sort of evolves as we go. Every piece of, or the beginning of every single job really starts with me talking to the homeowner and us gathering information, obviously. And then ultimately I sit down with the homeowners and I'll just start to doodle. I'll pull up their site and I might start with like the living area or something. And like here's kind of a kitchen and a family room that you were describing. And I'll doodle something out and they'll be like, well, I don't really like that because I like to have my coffee here or I don't like that view over there or whatever the case may be. And I kind of shift things around and then I'll draw a breakfast room and then I'll draw a dining room and I'll just keep maneuvering and shifting and then, the owner's suite and then so on and so forth and kind of draw like live in front of them. And then ultimately at the end of that session, or sometimes it's 2 or 3 sessions, but at the end of that, we have a game plan. It's really rough. It's not like a great like scaled drawing, but it shows where all the rooms will be located. And going back to the site, like we're thinking about like, how does this work with the topography? How does this work with the views and the sunlight and so on and so forth? We've come up with a really good game plan, the base of how that will kind of go to the next level and start to get put into the computer.
Okay.
So that's step one. And then step two, there's a little abbreviated piece where ultimately when I draw live for a client, it's very overwhelming for them. Like it's a lot of things at one time. So we allow them to have some breathing room with those drawings. And so they might come back 3 weeks later and we meet again. And in the meantime, I've done a little bit of homework just to kind of scale it out and put it on the side and put some room sizes on there and some square footage. And then ultimately we have a recap of what we started with. Okay. And so we go through it, and most of the time we kind of go through it and stay in a straight line and mold and shift. And sometimes once the client has sat on it for a few weeks, they're like, you know what, I told you I wanted this room here, but we've talked about it. I don't even want that room at all, or it has to be on the front of the house or whatever. Okay. So once we have that recap meeting, that's when I bring in my team. So my team comes in, we all sit down, we go through everything. So it's kind of like a recap / kickoff meeting. And my team generally consists of, with each project, so I'll have sometimes 2 project managers on it, and then I'll have a drafter as well. Okay. So the team is established. We all are in a room with the homeowner together going through that initial phase. And then at the end of that meeting, if we all feel good, then that's when we put it in our system and the project managers start getting it plugged in to the computer, and then we get it into 3D modeling, which wasn't around when you drew your house. So then it goes to the next phase. So at that point, again, the project manager set up like a clean preliminary plan. They set up 3D modeling. And once we meet again on day one, so the first time the homeowner ever really sees a first draft, which by the way, they already know what they're going to get because I sketched it live. Right. So they know where all the rooms are going to be, but it's kind of in a different phase. So day one of that we walk them through the house in 3D. It's super rough. That's amazing. And it's awesome. It's come a long way. Yeah. It's really cool. But it's rough. Like, it's not their exact finishes. There's not like crown molding or baseboard or anything. It's just like, here's the spatial recognition of this room so that you kind of know where you are. Because not everybody looks at 2D plans all day and understands what that feels like, right? Yeah. So we walk them through those spaces. And so I'll kind of like toggle between 2D and 3D the entire time. And you've seen it. I'll make markups with a red pen. And we'll just, much like the first meeting, we might shift some rooms around and pivot on some things and ultimately come up with a set of red lines. And then we do it all over again. They disappear for a few weeks. We present them with another drawing. We meet, we sit down, we mark it up again. And then we just keep doing that back and forth throughout the entire process. And so that's the beginning stage, right? Or that's the middle stage. And then ultimately at the end, once everybody feels good about the drawings, then we go into finals, which ultimately is all the documentation, the cross sections, the notes, the framing details. And then we finalize and send it to the engineer after that.
The 3D process is it's just an amazing thought. So I look at a lot of plans in 2D all the time. So, talking about my work, we have lots of offices all over the country. A lot of those offices, we either remodel, we may merge them, we may move them, we have de novos. And so we have to get the plans correct. And there is a lot of how you process patients is really based on how the office is laid out. Right, so of course, getting really comfortable with the flow and the way things work. I see a lot of plans in 2D. Sometimes they'll send the 3D renderings, which are not the same. And I'm like, hey, I don't need that. I need the 2D one because I can see it in space looking at the 2D, but not everybody can.
Right, absolutely. Right? Most people can't.
And so what's really neat is that there are things, though, that if you're walking a client through in the 2D, they won't catch some of the things that they're going to be annoyed by later. Right. 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 And so having the 3D is just really, really, really interesting. We went through this process with this house, and Kate and I were probably like really fast on the this is what we like. Man, we don't like that. Here's what we got to think about. Right. Right. And after living here, you would kind of think, man, what did I miss? Right. There have been literally only 2 things in this entire place that we thought we looked at and thought, if we had seen it in 3D, we may have done it differently. Yeah. One of them, oddly enough, was the swing on a door.
Really?
Yeah.
Man.
And so, you don't catch it when you're doing it. We didn't catch it when the builder was here, but after using it for a while, you're like, man, that door needs to swing the other way.
It's so funny. And those are things now, the process, we walk through it's almost like a video game. Like you can go in and walk through every single room, and we play around with flow and sightline. And yes, homeowners can visualize things a lot better, but quite frankly, even me and our team can you look at a sight line and you're like, oh, that window and that door doesn't really line up how I want. Like I want that wall to be super intentional. Like everywhere I turn, I want that to be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
So I turn this way and look and like what's there and what pulls me that way. And then is that door like off center, or can I improve that sight line? And that's hugely beneficial when you can walk through in 3D.
That's awesome, because people may not realize how important that is. Because some of it's subconscious, right? Like you kind of walk into a room and you're like, this feels good, or
you don't know
there's
why.
something that doesn't feel right, and you don't know exactly what it is. So being able to catch those things is amazing.
It's those things. It's those little things of just lining things up and making the rooms feel scaled properly that make the huge difference. And I always think that it's subconscious, as you said. I mean, you can walk in a space. I do it myself, and I'm like, this doesn't feel good. And then you walk into another room, you're like, man, I don't know what it is, but that feels awesome.
Right.
That feels great,
Which actually makes me think about the difference between interior design and the process that we're talking about now, and where they start and stop.
Yeah.
Because there's got to be elements in the actual design of the space that influence where you go for an interior design, or the soft things, right?
Absolutely.
And so how do you think about that?
So I'm glad you asked. And this is a piece of our evolution with Frazier Home Design, which is really interesting to us because we're in the middle of this right now. But for years, what we would do is obviously make assumptions on the interiors, but ultimately Frazier Home Design draws, of course, the floor plans and all the flow and sight lines and everything that I mentioned. And of course, the exterior, we dimension every quarter of the inch of the exterior and think of all the materials and everything. But then an interior designer comes in, a lot of times at the end of the project, and we kind of hand off and don't communicate that much. And they design the interiors. They go with the homeowner and pick out the countertops and the appliances and the colors, of course, and a lot of times trim and things. And that works well a lot of times. But to kind of go where we want to go as a company and be, again, thoughtful, intentional, I knew that we had to be involved in the interior process. So recently I teamed up with Noble Studio Interiors and moved them into our office. They're a team of 5.
Okay.
And the idea is they won't necessarily work on like every one of our projects. They're a separate company, and they still work with other architects and other builders, and we still work with other interior designers, but ultimately formed this partnership because we had this commonality, this theme of being super thoughtful and super intentional, right? And so the idea is that their team would be involved with projects from the very beginning, and in with me while I'm like hand sketching with a homeowner, just understanding the client like from the very beginning. And what's really cool is they start shaping up their plan like in the very beginning stages, and it allows us all to look at every wall and every sight line and everything together. And then like, what can we do to improve this space? And they look at it from a different perspective, or they might hear something a little different from the client than the way that I hear it, and want to pull an emotion out of a room a little differently than I would have, right? And so again, we like collaborate on all of that. And sort of the silver lining or the icing on the cake is that because we're in 3D now, they can do their full vision board like they would normally do, but then we can take that and put that back into 3D. And that's not like the whole thing. The real thing is the collaboration. But again, icing on the cake is this 3D modeling where they can then see these 3D images with their selections instead of just seeing like a vision board, with a bunch of things laid on top of each other, whether it's physical or digital. Now they can see it. And we've gone a step further, kind of going down into 3D land of where they can put on VR goggles and walk inside and feel the space. I know it's a whole different, this is all evolved in the past 2 years, but the interior piece has really just started to evolve in the last couple months.
Oh, that's me. So first of all, I've got to come to the office and see the space.
Yeah, man.
But I got to put on the VR goggles and
have to
and explore. Like that's pretty awesome.
Do you get seasick?
No.
Perfect.
No.
Come on in.
Rock solid.
Awesome. We've had people not experience seasickness like with them on, but when you watch somebody else doing it, it's on the screen. It looks like a little sort of jagged and jumbled, And so we've had some people like, I think I need to step out of the room. But man, when I walk through a 3D model with a client, it happens a lot that they go, you know what, this room feels tight. Feels a little small. And I'm like, it's 30 by 30 and it's 12-foot ceiling. It's not small. But then you put on the 3D goggles and you're like, oh, now I get it. Like you are physically in the room and you feel the space, and it makes such a difference 3D again is great for spatial recognition and understanding like, oh, that's what I see when I'm at my island. I see the staircase over there. I get that. But you can't get a feel like of the scale until you put the VR goggles on.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. And I love the element. And it was not a plan. We did not talk about this beforehand, but it's kind of how my mind works, right? Like you've got the elements of interior design, and when you're thinking about interior design, there's soft things, right? Like you've got your rug, you've got your sofa, but there are other things that could be important to the way the room functions. So, we talked earlier about, we have a podcasting studio here, but because this is something I like, I think I'm going to try to do it for an extended period of time. I want to have a space that's really purpose for that. But, you would think that the wall materials would be different, and you would think about placement of elements like doors differently because of trying to control the sound. And so when in the traditional process, you might not think about, I'm not going to be using normal drywall until you got to the builder and started that process, which may be a little late because there could be things that you want to change about the way the room is designed to allow for that non-traditional wall covering.
Absolutely. And that's what happens a lot of times as you get the house framed. An interior designer comes in a little bit before that, but then you kind of have to like make things work. Whereas when you do it in the very beginning and things are still very pliable, you're able to manipulate. And again, especially in, when we can see it in 3D and we work with an interior designer, is you think about every wall. And not only, I think the difference between like a decorator and an interior designer is an interior designer is not only thinking about that wall and what that looks like, but how do you want to feel in this room? Like almost like designing for wellness in a lot of cases, right? Like I want that room, you want that to be your cozy room. All right, let's pull these colors out of it. Let's think about this light coming in. Let's do these details. And when we collaborate on that, I think we're able to be the most successful because the architecture team is thinking about it from a different perspective, potentially than the interior designer and vice versa, right? So we're kind of working together and collaborating, again, from the beginning. And so Noble does that really well. And Kate Haynes has a lot of the same sort of philosophies that I do on design. And we meshed really well, when we started working together. And like, this just feels really good and intentional. That's where we want to go. So
that's incredible.
Yes, we're going down that road. It's pretty cool.
Wow. Timing is everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you've gone through your journey of now drawing and kind of making things your own, are there signature elements that you tend to repeat in homes?
I think that's a leading question, artist potentially. And I struggle with this. Because I'm certainly early on, right? Like, again, I told you, I kind of went down the rabbit hole of English arts and crafts architecture, which has a lot of peaks, a lot of swoops, a lot of window towers. And that's just what I was like, man, this is really cool. Yeah. I'm going to try to work in a window tower, even in a French style house, right? Like how can I pull all these elements together? And I struggle with it because like, you think of like Picasso or something, you can see one of his designs from a mile away, right?
Right.
But I'm designing for homeowners, so I'm designing for them. It's not for me. So I like to think that we can pivot at any time and design any style, and we do. We design all sorts of different styles all throughout the country. And I don't know, I try to always like add a little bit of something where that it's Frazier-Home design, but also try to take the ego out of it and make it about the homeowner. The interesting thing of that as well is a lot of homeowners are coming to us for those elements. Like, we love everything you draw. We want that vibe. And some of them are kind enough to say, like, we want it to feel like a Frazier-Home design house. So it's very rewarding, but I do struggle with that.
It's a legitimate question because I think we fell on the side of, wow, we really like some of the elements. Who did this, right? And then we come and we find you and we're like, hey, we like this thing, we like that thing. And you're like, cool, let's put that in there, right? But it is very interesting to drive around Raleigh and see homes, and you can with some certainty say Frazier Home Design
Right.
had
Right.
something to do with this home, right? Because there are these things that you see
Yeah.
in the elements. Are there favorites? You mentioned the window tower, which
Yeah.
there are some amazing window towers in this neighborhood. I gotta
Right.
tell you.
Yes. We're a little saturated in this neighborhood. So, and as I keep saying the word evolution, like we've evolved so much as a company, and I think initially it was kind of like, hey, I want to do all this cool stuff, and maybe we were a little bit more like flamboyant, for lack of a better word, with things.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of show off a little bit and do some cool stuff and have people go like, oh my God, look at that house,
Yeah.
you know? And I don't know, maybe I've gotten a little bit more humble or just intentional, or I keep saying intentional and thoughtful, and that's kind of where I want to go. But really the core of what I want and where we're going as a company is I want to design things that have like timeless bones and structure and proportion and scale, and maybe add like a little bit of modern sort of influence and flair to it, where you can see like a little bit of something. But I want it, I think certainly early on in my career when I was in the flamboyant stage, I don't know that you'll look at those houses in 50 years and say, oh, that's timeless. Like that still stands the test of time. Hopefully they do, but certainly where we're going now as a company, and you can see it if you go to our portfolio and kind of look down the timeline of things, you can see a shift where we've become a lot more concentrated on scale and the humble approach to architecture, where I don't feel like I need to throw as much at it anymore. Like I want to get the materials right and again, get the scale and the proportion right, and be just, I want to kind of think about each piece in a way like, how does this pay respect to the original intent of architecture when it started versus just my interpretation of it?
I think that's fair. I mean, there's something to be said for subtle branding
Right.
and maybe Easter eggs,
Yeah,
right?
there you go.
And I think in some of the more recently designed homes, you're right. I look at them and I see very, very nice proportions. They make me feel good because you look at it and you go, nothing's out of place, right? But you may be walking up the front stairs and get onto the stoop and look up and you're like, oh, he had to draw that, right?
Right.
Because there's this thing that's
Right.
there.
Right.
And I think that's great.
Thanks, buddy.
Well, I think that's great, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not taking away from the overall design of the home, but it's giving you something that's a little bit special,
Right.
and really reminds you that this is a custom home that was drawn by a real live human being. It wasn't just created out of space, right?
Yeah. Well said.
And that there should be something, just like an artist who's signing their signature,
Yeah.
that belongs to the person who helped to draw
I
the
love
home.
that. I love that. And one of the other pieces of the evolution of the design was, again, I was sort of getting more comfortable with ourselves and not feeling we needed to show off. But fortunately, we started to see other designers that were kind of like doing that as well. And it was kind of cool. Like, I'd get people like, hey, doesn't quite look like one of yours, but did you draw that? I'm like, no, I didn't, but that's so cool. It's like, what a neat thing.
Yeah.
To like sort of, and again, Dixon Kirby started it for me. So I
Right.
can't claim that I did anything, right? But it's so cool to sort of make a presence in Raleigh from this kid that started out of his house in 2007 and just kind of worked hard and built up, and then in this sea of other people that were so talented, and then look around and go like, man, there's a lot of houses that are kind of like emulating where we were going with that movement. And so I want to be better, right? Like I want to keep going. I don't want to look like that anymore.
Yeah.
Like I'll dip into that. And then when people come out of state and want like the Frazier Home Design Special, we do it, but I try not to do it as much here because you know what I mean? There's a lot of them. So I want to make sure that we kind of move to the next level, and really the best way, and I learned this from the teachers that I mentioned earlier, the indirect teachers, is that they are doing things that are very thoughtful with material and scale and proportion. And that's where I wanted to go, where we're not showing off. We're sort of evoking the emotion of not like, I want that, but I want to be in that, or I want to know what's inside. I want to feel that space versus like, that looks cool, I want that,
And I think that makes sense. I mean, if we kind of look at it globally and just kind of think about throughout time, there have been periods of time where homes shared a tremendous number of details, right?
Right.
And we can look at say, oh, that's a Victorian, or like you could just kind of say these homes are in these categories because they share all these details,
Right.
And sometimes those details are shared in a relatively tight geography,
Right.
and so I do think that 25, 30 years from now, there will be a group of homes in Raleigh that will be part of the era, right?
Right.
And people who are moving to town will likely be able to think, wow, this is one of those homes that was designed by Frazier-Home
That's
Design
really cool.
in this era, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's really cool. I don't want you to stop hiding things.
Thanks,
I
man.
want you to pop things in
Thank
there
you.
because it makes it fun.
You had teased with music earlier.
Yeah.
I kind of go into my head with music, and I'm 43, so 80s hair metal was a thing for me. And when you think about that music, it was very like exactly what the time needed, right? Like it was very flamboyant and in your face and direct to a certain extent. But know that, when that sort of that need for that type of feeling went away into the grunge era, that stuff just was gone in seconds.
Yeah.
And I think about that with our business, right? Like right now, that's really, really popular to do that style. And so I look at it and go like, I don't want to be this like giving everybody exactly what they want over and over and over again for this one little piece of time. I want to back up a little bit.
That's fair.
And I want to think about things from a larger perspective to be sustainable, right? And so I want to kind of keep that going. And getting into the entrepreneurial side, by the way, I also do that with business where I never want to stay stagnant. I never want to get to a point where I'm going like, this is easy. Like, this is how we're going to do this. Let's just kind of coast. Like I'm always pushing and going to the next level continuously with the business in so many different arenas of the business. And as I mentioned earlier, we're a whole different company than like when we drew this house. And hopefully in another 2 years, we'll be a different company. It just keeps evolving, and design is a big piece of that. Like it's the entrepreneurial side and the design side that hopefully continue to evolve and stay in a current space.
And I think those are the types of elements that make you successful, even in those periods when the faucets turn
Right.
And so being able to think about it from all of those dimensions, I really think is very, very interesting.
Right.
How do you think about remodels or renovations or additions when you're starting with someone else's design?
So it's funny that you say that. The easy thing for us when we got busy was to say, you know what, we don't do renovations anymore, because it was like generally renovations they're really fun, but they're challenging, and you're somewhat like limited, right? And it wasn't really where we wanted to go as a company. So when things like all started just flooding in, and we had all this recognition, it was like, what, from an entrepreneurial standpoint, like what's the easy thing just to kind of cut away?
Yeah.
So we don't do a lot of renovations anymore. It's only just, past clients or houses that we have drawn, or sometimes a builder will talk me into it. It's like, hey man, it's a really easy one. Come on. And it always, I'm telling
Famous
you,
last words, it's
every
really
time it snowballs.
Right.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
So every time.
Yes.
Every time.
We are familiar.
Yeah.
I cannot let you go, though, without talking about this guitar playing.
Oh, cool.
So you mentioned 80s music. When did you pick up guitar to start?
So I got a guitar for Christmas in 1991.
Okay.
And, it was the era of grunge at the time, so like grunge was really big. So I got really, really into Nirvana and Soundgarden, and really it came about because as a group of kids, I lived in this neighborhood. We got all these kids, we grew up there our entire lives together. And there was a group of 4 boys that I hung out with most of the time. And we decided we wanted to start a band, but we didn't know how to play instruments. And so we all kind of, I don't know that we drew straws, but we kind of like went around and like, what do you want to play? What do you want to play? And then so 2 of us got guitars, and his parents were kind enough to give him lessons. And so we got guitars, he would take lessons, and then he would come back and like teach me what he
cool
learned.
Is that?
It's super cool. So he'd spend the night, and then like, the next day I would know a Nirvana song or something. so that kind of like, built up a little bit over time in the grunge area. And then I kind of went into an acoustic thing, and then was in bands, in school, and nothing big, nothing crazy, but I was going to be a rock star. I was pretty sure. But I started drawing, or I kept drawing, and drawing went a lot farther.
Now, do you sing too? Or
I don't really sing, but I play, guitar is my thing.
That's awesome. So I played saxophone as my formal instrument, but I ended up playing quite a few things. So I did a little French horn. I did a little oboe. I did contra, bass,
all the
clarinet.
mainstream stuff.
Yeah, like all the things that that people clamor to do and to hear are the things that I played.
Love it.
But it was neat because you end up, that part of your brain is just different than the part of, or for me, my day-to-day is not that side of my brain.
Right.
And so I recently decided I'm going to get my saxophone back out.
Nice.
And if you see Cade, he's going to pick on me because I also have decided that I want to learn to play cello.
Nice. I like it.
And
I like it.
I don't know how that works as an adult, but I got a cello. And I have it, and when we finish this room, I'm going to put the cello in the room, and the saxophone's going to be in the room.
That's great,
and,
man.
and I'm going to learn to play the cello. So
you should take lessons. You should take some lessons from, there'll be a line of kids, and then you're like at the end of the line, and then you go in, and then
that's what I'm worried about. Like, there's got to be some remote option for at least beginning cello lessons, because I got to go in like I know something, right? Like I can't come into the place I've never learning to put the thing together. You have to, because when they ship them, they're not actually fully assembled.
Right.
So you got to put this.
So YouTube was your friend?
Oh yeah. I was like, I'm gonna put this thing together. It's gonna be great, and then I'm gonna learn to pluck it. And I've got my bow, and I've had to learn about all the stuff you use to put on the bow.
Right.
And I'm gonna learn to play Hot Cross Buns because that's the most important song ever. Once I've done that, then I'll think about actually going somewhere.
So a little tidbit here. So I inherited my grandparents' piano, I think when I was 26 or 7 or something, and I didn't know how to play, and I felt obligated once I got the piano. So
of course,
when I was a kid, my buddy up the street, his mom taught piano lessons, and so kids would kind of cycle in and out in the afternoons at the house. And so I called her up and I said, "Hey, I really want to learn piano." And so I would do just that. Like I would show up at 5:30, and there's like some kid finishing, an 8-year-old finishing, and then I would come in, and then at the end of the year we'd have a recital, and it would be me and then a bunch of 8 to 12-year-olds. There's a bunch of smiling parents, and then I'd bring my wife, and then have like a group of friends, and one of them like, guys, come check me out at this recital. It's a big deal, and then the kids would be better than me.
So everybody's expecting a concerto, and you're busy playing Mary Had a Little Lamb.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
I got it.
That's exactly how that went.
Well, Tony, is there any advice you would give someone who is really thinking about either starting their own business, or if they were thinking about entering your field?
So I'll zoom out a little bit and think about just business in general. One, you have to really, really love what you do. And you have to be, especially if you're starting a bit like on your own, right? Mm-hmm. Like you have to love what you do. You are not going to work less when you start your business than you did when you were working for somebody. It is going to be painful, and you're going to grind, and you have to be willing to work through all of that pain, and in the end you have to love it. Otherwise you'd be crazy, right? So you have to love what you do and push, and always, continuously evolve. I've seen a lot of companies fail because they just sat and said, I'm good where I am. So be prepared to never settle down, and always feel that something's chasing you, and you want to continually get better and improve and love it, right?
Yeah.
So,
I really, really thank you for spending the time. This has been great.
Yeah, man, it has been great. Thanks for having me here.
And I'm really serious about coming to the office. Like, you've got toys. I like toys, so I kind of want to play with them.
Okay. Pop on some goggles. It'll be awesome.
Awesome. And if you enjoyed this show, make sure to check out other episodes and subscribe so you don't miss any of our special guests. And don't forget to rate the podcast and tell your friends. As always, thanks for spending part of your day with us. And until next time, this has been Uncommonly Remarkable.